Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith. This is the Quantum Zodiac series, and today we are discussing the planet Saturn. Now, Saturn, we have now entered and are at the realm of form, the material experience that we know and see in our daily lives. It all begins with Saturn. So up until now, through the planets we've been moving with Neptune and Pluto and Uranus, we've been moving through the field beyond form, where all possibilities exist. It's this unified state. And now Saturn is where something is becoming experienced within the realm of form. It's translating that into an experience. So there is a quote that I would like to start with from cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman, because it just sets the tone for what it is that Saturn represents, and especially as it relates to our modern discoveries in science and in the world of quantum theory. So he says no object in space-time is fundamental. So that includes your body. Whatever you are not an object that exists in space-time. And he says to the contrary, space-time and everything in space-time is a creation of yours on the fly. So that's a pretty radical statement, especially because it's flipping the entire concept of how we've been taught to view our world on its head, right? We've been taught that what we can see and touch is what's real and everything else is imagination. And this statement is saying everything you can touch and see is an illusion of something going on deeper in the unseen realms. So Saturn is not usually associated with any unseen realms or something that we would not be able to see and touch. It is governing what shows up in the here, in the now, in the physical, what appears to us as real. And through that, it has boundaries. There are rules. There are limits. There's that definition there. But Saturn is not telling us that these objects and in space-time, these things are fundamentally real. Saturn is just governing how reality as we see it appears. How our perceived reality appears. Now, in science, in modern science, we have something that is called the observer problem, because if we look at classical Newtonian physics, where everything we see and touch is what's real, everything else is fantasy and illusion. In this model, the observer didn't really matter because reality was just assumed to just be there, right? What you could see and touch was what was real, and an observer is simply just looking at that. Okay, would you just look at it? You're just looking at it. But with Einstein, the observer and his theories of relativity, the observer started to enter the picture a little bit more, because different observers could now measure different things depending on things like speed and gravity. So there was this relative difference in an experience. So it introduced the concept of relativity and observers having different experiences. But it was more just an introduction, and it never really went deep into a theory of the observer itself. So now with quantum theory, you go from having one single experience or events that are happening and everybody simultaneously just observing that one event, to all possible events and outcomes existing simultaneously. And it speaks to this concept called unitary evolution. And what that really just means is that the way in which a system changes is always fully reversible, and you never lose any information. So you can't have a change in a system that is isolated or that is irreversible or permanent, because all possibilities, all events, all outcomes exist simultaneously, all at once, always have and always will. So how do you go from that, where everything exists at once, to having an experience where you're perceiving only one event happening at a time? And they seem to be linked, right? So this leads us to Schrodinger's equation, which is the law that basically guarantees this unitary evolution. So from Schrodinger's equation, we know that information is never destroyed, and things will always exist simultaneously. Things always exist together and all at once. It's never either or. So you can't say the pen is blue or red. In this theory from Schrodinger's equation and unitary evolution, you know that the pen is always both blue and red, for example. And so what happens to your experience that you only observe the red pen instead of the blue pen? And with Schrodinger's equation, the observer branches out to experience both. And one branch is observing the red pen, and one branch is observing the blue pen, but they both exist, and no information is lost, no choice is made that cannot be reversed. And this is where we get to the concept of quantum entanglement, where if one electron is spin up, the other electron will be always observed to spin down, because the probabilities always equal 1, and both states always exist simultaneously. So this is essentially what we know as the observer problem, where science today is trying to reconcile that unified quantum field where all possibilities exist and always will and always have, into a perceived single experience. And I am going to link in the show notes an interview with Donald Hoffman on the Know Thyself podcast, where he talks about this in great detail. So if you do feel called to dig into this further, it's extremely interesting information, and he describes his work on what he calls trace logic, which I will discuss a little bit here, as it is very relevant to Saturn and specifically Aquarius. But I will link that interview in the show notes, so if you would like to dive into this in further detail, please do check that out. I would recommend it. So Saturn rules, as we know, 2 signs, Aquarius and Capricorn. And Aquarius represents the network. So in Hoffman's work, reality is emergent from what he calls this trace logic, which is an invisible web of experiences and probabilities that gives us space-time. So each observer has their own unique experience, and those experiences overlap and interact. And the fabric of all of that overlapping and interacting of each individual experience is what creates space-time. And Aquarius is about individuality, right? The unique individual. Each node in this network that must be allowed to be itself for the system to function properly. And when individuals are denied their own experience or forced to copy someone else's version of reality, or repress their own expression and experience in favor of somebody else's, or for fear or whatever reason, it creates this entropy in the system. And the system becomes inefficient. And so Aquarius is highly concerned with the integrity of the experience, the integrity of each individual having their own experience. And this is also why Aquarius is associated with rebels and visionaries and being future orientated, because at this level, everything exists simultaneously. And Schrodinger's equation describes a reality that is always reversible, right? It's always whole, where nothing is truly lost, nothing is final. And if we insist on viewing life as linear and irreversible, we violate this deeper truth. And we also contradict spiritual teachings that speak of unity, immortality, and higher states of peace. So then how do we get from this vast network of simultaneous possibilities all existing at once in this unified field to having this moment right now, which sure appears to be only one moment? And that's Capricorn. And Capricorn is quantization, which is ruled by Saturn. So Capricorn takes the information in the infinite and it says, we are choosing this experience. Not all of them, they all exist, but we are branching into observing just this experience. Now, because we know that the system must remain whole, if you choose to branch into the experience of the red pen, there must also be a parallel branch that is observing the blue pen. So now we are going into the realm of parallel lives, or what we have traditionally interpreted as past lives and karma. And it makes sense that Saturn rules karma and past lives. And that is why the sea goat, as the symbol for Capricorn, is so perfect, because it's half water, half earth. It's a potential of something becoming density, becoming form. It is branching off to observe two outcomes, the goat or the fish, the blue pen or the red pen. And through this process of quantization, space-time is rendered, an outcome is being observed. And when we look at the symbol for quantization, specifically the reduced Planck's constant symbol, you get the exact same symbol that we use in astrology for Saturn. It's that H bar symbol. When I found this, I had an experience outside of time because I couldn't tell what came first, the chicken or the egg. Did Max Planck create the symbol for the reduced constant after astrology? Or did ancient astrology somehow know that this symbol was the correct symbol to use for the concept of quantization? All possibilities exist at once, right? And this linear experience is in fact an illusion. And so this was such a beautiful experience for Saturn to gift me of how true this really is, right? Because all things exist simultaneously. So when we see these symbols existing simultaneously, I deeply feel there is a synchronicity there. And it was such a beautiful vision, such a beautiful sight to see the similarities between them. Now, Saturn also rules authority because Saturn chooses. So just like Hoffman says, no one else renders your steering wheel. No one else renders your traffic light. You are rendering your own experience. And Saturn sets these boundaries on that experience to create a meaning. Because if we imagine every letter from every language existing all at once, right? They're always there to choose from. And Saturn is the act of choosing specific letters from a specific alphabet in a specific order to form a word. So without that choice, there's no meaning. There's just the infinite potential of everything existing. And Saturn creates that meaning from selecting certain letters to form certain words. Now, within this linear framework, right, we're in Saturn, so now we're in the experience. We've selected our letters to form our words, to have the meaning and experience that we want. And within this linear framework, we now experience virtues and vices. And with Saturn in this process, through Aquarius being that vast connected network of infinite possibility and everybody's experience overlapping and interacting with one another, and us choosing our own experience in Capricorn, envy arises when we forget this. We forget that all possibilities exist. And when we believe that someone else's experience somehow limits our own, because we fall back into there's only one world and there's not enough to go around, is the illusion. But the reality is that we are all, each of us, generating our own unique experience from our own selection of the infinite sea of possibility. And so no one else's gains or loss can possibly reduce your access to your own possibility. So envy is really just forgetting that, forgetting who we truly are. And the medicine for that is the virtue of kindness. Because when we remember our true nature, we remember what is happening outside of the experience of form, we remember that what exists in one exists in all. So we are not separate beings. We are expressions of the same unified field of consciousness. And we were given this golden rule to remind us that what you do to another, you do to yourself. What you do to another, you do to all. And this virtue guides us back into alignment with our true selves so that we can work with Saturn consciously rather than resisting its limits, resisting the process, resisting the structure. So, just a reminder that I am not making formal claims here in any way. I am meaning to offer a perspective, a way of seeing how astrology, physics, mathematics, spirituality, religious teachings are not separate. They're different languages that, or different ways of exploring our same unified wholeness. And if you would like to explore Saturn through a gentle yin yoga practice, I do have that available on my website at enchantedAstrology.ca. You can also try a yin yoga practice on Aquarius and Capricorn, or pair them together. And this works with the deeper connective tissues of the body. So thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Zodiac series. Next week, we will be exploring the planet Jupiter.